In the quiet moments of reflection, we often stumble upon questions that challenge our understanding of life, morality, and faith. Imagine a world where decisions are made without accountability, where each person does what they think is right, regardless of the consequences. What happens to a society when there is no higher authority guiding its people? These are not abstract questions. Their realities explored in one of the Bible's most haunting narratives, Judges chapters 19 through 21. This story is not for the faint of heart. It delves into the darkest corners of human behavior, exposing the consequences of spiritual drift, unchecked sin, and moral decay. It's a narrative so stark, so raw, that it compels us to confront uncomfortable truths about humanity and ourselves. If you've ever wondered how small decisions can spiral into devastating outcomes, this story offers an unforgettable example. The setting is ancient Israel, a time when the nation had no king and each person acted as they saw fit. It was an era marked by chaos and moral confusion, where the absence of leadership left a vacuum for sin to flourish. Within this context, the story of a Levite and his concubine unfolds, a tale of betrayal, violence, and the unraveling of a community. As we step into this narrative, we meet a Levite who takes a concubine from Bethlehem. What starts as a seemingly ordinary relationship quickly turns sour when she betrays him and flees to her father's house. The Levite, after months of separation, journeys to retrieve her, setting the stage for an encounter that will forever alter their lives and the history of Israel. The journey home is long and treacherous, a metaphor for the fractured state of the nation itself. Along the way, the couple finds themselves in Gibeah, a town within the tribe of Benjamin. Despite the cultural importance of hospitality, no one offers them shelter except an old man. What begins as an act of kindness soon turns into a night of terror. A mob of wicked men surrounds the house, demanding to assault the Levite. What follows is a series of decisions so horrific that they defy comprehension. But why revisit such a story? Why dwell on a narrative so deeply unsettling? Because within its layers of tragedy lie lessons that resonate across centuries. It forces us to examine what happens when a society turns its back on God, when individuals prioritize personal desires over communal well-being, and when the sanctity of life is devalued. Consider this. How many times in our own lives do we witness or even participate in decisions that, while seemingly small, carry far-reaching consequences? Perhaps it's an unkind word that sows division, a moment of inaction in the face of injustice, or a choice to prioritize self-interest over the greater good. These decisions, like the ones made in Judges 19, do not exist in isolation. They ripple outward, affecting not only the immediate participants, but also the broader community. This is a story that challenges us to reflect on the role of accountability in our lives. Who do we answer to? What anchors our decisions and guides our actions? In the absence of a moral compass, how do we prevent ourselves from drifting into chaos? These are not just questions for ancient Israel, they are questions for today, for every individual navigating the complexities of modern life. So, as we embark on this journey through one of the most sobering stories in the Bible, I invite you to look beyond the surface. Let this narrative speak to your heart, not merely as a historical account, but as a mirror reflecting the choices we all face. And as we explore its lessons, may we find the courage to align our lives with values that uplift and sustain, even in the midst of life's darkest moments. In the days when there was no king in Israel, society was adrift, with moral boundaries blurred and justice often forsaken. The book of Judges captures this chaotic period, and in chapters 19 through 21, we encounter a story that unveils the devastating consequences of a people untethered from God. This narrative, both haunting and profound, revolves around a Levite, his concubine, and a journey that begins in hope but ends in tragedy. Beneath its grim surface lies a cautionary tale about the dangers of moral decay, the weight of decisions, and the call for accountability in every generation. The story begins in a remote region of the hill country of Ephraim, where a Levite, a man set apart for priestly duties, takes a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. This relationship, while culturally permissible at the time, carried implications of inequality, She was neither a wife in full standing nor a mere servant, but existed in a nebulous space of social and emotional vulnerability. The concubine eventually leaves the Levite, returning to her father's house in Bethlehem, an act described as unfaithfulness. For 4 months, the Levite makes no effort to reconcile with her, but something, perhaps duty, pride, or affection, prompts him to journey southward to bring her back. When the Levite arrives, the concubine's father welcomes him warmly, showing great hospitality. Yet, this hospitality becomes a delaying tactic. Day after day, the father persuades the Levite to stay another night. Perhaps he hoped to strengthen ties or ensure his daughter's safety, but the repeated delays suggest an unease about the journey ahead. Finally, the Levite insists on leaving, and with his concubine and servant, he sets out late in the day, a decision that proves to be tragically ill-timed. As night falls, the travelers near the city of Gibeah, within the territory of Benjamin. They pause, seeking shelter, but no one in the city offers them hospitality, a shocking breach of the cultural norms of the time. The absence of kindness foreshadows the darkness lurking within the city. Finally, an old man returning from his fields sees them in the town square and insists on taking them into his home, warning them not to spend the night outside. What happens next plunges the narrative into unimaginable horror. As the guests settle in for the evening, the house is surrounded by a group of wicked men from the city. They demand the old man send out the Levite so they might abuse him. The old man pleads with them, calling their actions vile and offering instead his own virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine. This shocking proposal underscores the deep moral corruption of the time, where the value of women's lives and dignity is cast aside to protect male honor. The mob refuses to relent, and in a moment of staggering cowardice, the Levite thrusts his concubine out to them. She is subjected to a night of unspeakable violence. By morning, she collapses at the threshold of the house, her hands outstretched towards safety. When the Levite steps outside, his response is chilling in its detachment. "Get up," he says, as if her ordeal is an inconvenience. But there is no answer, she is dead. The Levite lifts her lifeless body onto his donkey and returns home. There, in an act both horrific and calculated, he dismembers her body into 12 pieces and sends them across the territories of Israel. Each piece carries a message, a demand for justice that shocks the nation into action. The tribes of Israel gather, unified in outrage. "Nothing like this has ever happened since the days we came out of Egypt," they declare. Yet their response, while righteous in its desire for justice, quickly spirals into further violence. The tribes demand that the men of Gibeah be handed over for punishment. But the tribe of Benjamin refuses, choosing to protect their own rather than confront the evil within. This defiance leads to civil war, pitting Benjamin against the rest of Israel. The battles are brutal, with tens of thousands of lives lost. Ultimately, the tribe of Benjamin is nearly annihilated. Only 600 men survive, fleeing to the wilderness. As the dust settles, a new crisis emerges. The remaining tribes realize that their vengeance has brought Benjamin to the brink of extinction. In their zeal, they had vowed not to give their daughters in marriage to Benjaminite men, leaving the tribe without means to rebuild. This realization sparks a series of morally questionable decisions. First, they attack the city of Jabesh-Gilead, killing its inhabitants and taking 400 virgins to give as wives to the Benjaminites. When this proves insufficient, they allow the Benjaminites to abduct women from a festival in Shiloh, effectively condoning further violence to rectify their earlier choices. The story ends on a somber note. Benjamin rebuilds, but the cost of the conflict is immeasurable. The final verse of Judges captures the essence of the era. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This refrain is both an indictment and a lament, underscoring the chaos that ensues when a society abandons its moral and spiritual foundation. What can we learn from this harrowing tale? First, it highlights the consequences of moral drift. The people of Israel had turned away from God, and without a shared sense of accountability, their society descended into chaos. This drift was not sudden but gradual, a series of compromises and neglect that led to a culture where evil could thrive unchecked. Second, the story challenges us to consider the value we place on human life. The Levite, the old man, and the men of Gibeah all failed to see the concubine as a person made in the image of God. Her suffering and death became a means to an end, a tool for outrage or survival, rather than a tragedy demanding compassion and justice. Third, it warns against the dangers of collective sin and the failure to confront wrongdoing. The tribe of Benjamin's refusal to hold Gibeah accountable led to devastating consequences not only for themselves, but for all of Israel. Similarly, the other tribes' actions, while driven by a desire for justice, were marred by vengeance and moral compromise. Finally, the story reminds us of the need for leadership and accountability. The refrain, "There was no king in Israel," points to a deeper truth. Without God as their ultimate authority, the people were lost. This lack of direction allowed sin to flourish, leading to suffering on an unimaginable scale. But even in the darkness, there is a glimmer of hope. The survival of Benjamin, however tenuous, points to God's enduring grace. Despite their failures, the Israelites were not abandoned. This grace is a reminder that even in our worst moments, God offers a path to redemption. It challenges us to turn back to Him, to seek His guidance, and to strive for justice and mercy in our lives. As we reflect on this story, we must ask ourselves, what decisions are we making today that might lead to unintended consequences tomorrow? Are we drifting from God in subtle ways, allowing compromise to erode our moral foundation? And how can we, as individuals and communities, ensure that we value and protect the dignity of every person as a reflection of God's image? This tale from Judges is not just a record of Israel's past. It is a mirror held up to our own lives. It calls us to examine our hearts, to confront the sin and apathy within, and to seek a deeper relationship with the one who alone can guide us toward righteousness. The story of Judges 19 to 21, though disturbing, leaves us with several profound lessons that echo through time. These lessons are as relevant today as they were during Israel's period of chaos, and they challenge us to reflect on our personal choices, our societal values, and our relationship with God. First, the narrative demonstrates the devastating consequences of spiritual drift. When a nation or individual turns away from God's principles, moral decay is inevitable. The Israelites in the story lived without accountability, making choices based on personal desires rather than divine guidance. The result was violence, betrayal, and chaos. This serves as a stark warning for us to remain steadfast in our faith, seeking God's wisdom in every decision and staying connected to Him through prayer and His Word. Second, the story underscores the importance of recognizing the value of every human being. The Levite's concubine was treated as disposable, her suffering ignored even by those who should have protected her. This dehumanization reflects the dangers of a society that fails to uphold the sanctity of life. In our own lives, we are called to love and respect others, seeing them as bearers of God's image. This means standing against injustice, advocating for the vulnerable, and extending compassion to all people. Another key takeaway is the ripple effect of sin. The initial crime in Gibeah led to a series of escalating events, a brutal civil war, the near extinction of the tribe of Benjamin, and morally questionable attempts to resolve the conflict. This reminds us that sin rarely stays contained. It spreads, causing harm far beyond its origin. We must be vigilant in identifying and addressing sin in our own lives, understanding that our actions have consequences that can impact others in ways we may not foresee. Despite the bleakness of this story, it also reveals the enduring grace of God. Even in the midst of judgment, God allowed the tribe of Benjamin to survive and rebuild, showing His willingness to offer redemption to those who turn back to Him. This is a powerful reminder that no matter how far we've fallen, God's mercy is available to us. His grace can restore what is broken and bring hope out of despair. As we reflect on Judges 19 to 21, we must ask ourselves difficult questions. Are there areas in our lives where we've drifted from God? Do we treat others with the respect and love they deserve as His creation? Are we mindful of the consequences of our actions? This story invites us to take a closer look at our own lives and to seek God's guidance in all we do. Let it motivate us to pursue justice, value human dignity, and maintain a close relationship with the Creator who calls us to a life of integrity and love. If this message has resonated with you, consider joining our growing community by subscribing to our channel. Here, we dive into biblical stories, uncover their timeless lessons, and explore how they apply to our modern lives. By subscribing, you'll be the first to receive insights that challenge and inspire, helping you grow in faith and wisdom. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who might benefit from its message, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Together, let's continue to learn, reflect, and draw closer to God's purpose for us.